Member for Oakville Gordon Head.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise to take my place in the debate on Bill 25, Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 2016, Honourable Speaker. Like so many of these other Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Acts, this Act is a potpourri of changes to a variety of acts with some additional transitional provisions attached to them as need arises. Honourable Speaker, the Act amends 10 acts. The Agricultural Land Commission Act, which I'm sure the member from Saanich South will have some comments on, the Assessment Act, the Protected Areas of BC Act, the Environmental Management Act, the Income Tax Act, the Insurance Act, the Liquor Control and Licensing Act, the Local Government Act, the Mutual Fire Insurance Companies Act, and the Ministry of Lands, Parks and Housing Act. Honourable Speaker, under the ALC, there are two amendments to the ALC Act. The first is an amendment that will require the ALC to obtain the owner's consent before excluding land for the reserve. This is mostly applicable in boundary reviews, Honourable Speaker. The second, as the Minister mentioned, adds a regulation making authority so that the Commission can provide clarity to farmers about agritourism activities, for example, a wedding on a farm. And regulations on these are expected this spring. However, Honourable Speaker, there is a clause that does raise some concern, and that's clause 1.3 in this bill that I'm sure we can explore further at committee stage. And this seems to allow the Commission to have a loophole so that the consent by owners is not actually required to remove land from the ALR. I'd be interested in exploring what the government has in mind with respect to the inclusion of section 1.3 further at committee stage. Honourable Speaker, in terms of the Assessment Act, the amendment for this will give the Lieutenant Governor and Council the ability to prescribe assessed values for certain restricted use properties, and the change is designed to ensure that Crown corporations, either provincial or federal, on Crown land are paying their fair share of property taxes. On this, I think, Honourable Speaker, there will be a broad agreement as these are fine changes. Similar with the Local Government Act on page 5 of this bill, their amendment there fixes a mistake that was done in 2015 under the Statute Revision Act, and it removes a contraction that exists presently. Under the Environmental Management Act, Honourable Speaker, there's an amendment which gives the flexibility to the Minister to be able to update area-based management plans and improve permitting certainty within those areas. Specifically, Honourable Speaker, a Director is given the power to amend a permit after consultation with the Minister. I, again, see no problems in supporting this aspect. And then we come to the Protected Areas of BC Act, page 7, which is troubling. The amendment here reduces the size of Finn Creek of the park there so that the Kinder Morgan expansion can continue planning its route. And the proposed boundary adjustment will not be brought into force unless the NEB, of course, approves the project, the 5 conditions are met, and the province has issued an environmental assessment certificate, as the Minister pointed out. The park is reduced by a couple of hectares, but this reduction will cut a line, Honourable Speaker, directly through the northern section of the park. This follows Trans Mountain's request to the province to amend various parks for its proposed route in 2014. Honourable Speaker, obviously I will be opposing this particular amendment. This is precluding despite the fact that the Minister is giving us the assurance of the government that this will not be brought into force unless the NEB and the 5 conditions are met. The reality is that we are putting it in place now, and frankly that sends a signal that government is moving forwards to get to yes on a project that the majority of British Columbians realize is simply not reconcilable with their values. To turn Vancouver, the port in Vancouver, through the Burnaby facility, into one of the largest shippers of heavy oil in the world. It's simply not consistent with the values of British Columbians. And this particular amendment is troubling in that it's sending a green light signal that in its desperate to get to yes, no matter what the question is, government is already starting to introduce legislation to amend parks. Under the Income Tax Act, I find this very troubling as well, Honourable Speaker. Here, there's going to be provisions for a transitional period that will allow the film and television industry to adapt to the changes in tax credits recently announced. The amendments reduces the digital animation, visual effects, and post-production tax credit from 17% to 11% of the amount determined by the taxation formula. In my view, this is troubling, Honourable Speaker, because in doing this, what government is sending is it's sending a signal to an up-and-coming, vibrant sector that, you know what, you're not as welcome as you used to be. It's early, it's too early to be clawing back credits to an industry that is beginning to blossom, a 21st century economy industry in this province of British Columbia that we are known for internationally, beginning to emerge. And this government is now cutting out its heels, taking out its legs in the process. The Minister of Health doesn't think so, but I would like to hear the Honourable Speaker, the input that I'd be delighted to share the input I received from the industry with respect to this particular cut. It is troubling, Honourable Speaker. It is troubling when we are doing whatever we can to literally give away our natural gas resources to foreign entities who otherwise would not be here and still are probably not going to be here, even though we've given away the farm. And here we have an industry, a homegrown industry, jobs in BC industry, distributed jobs in BC industry, and we're saying, you know what, your time is over. We're going to continue to double down on the falling stock of liquefied natural gas, despite the fact that Australia is years ahead of us, despite the fact that China is now a seller on the international marketplace, despite the fact that not a single LNG facility has been approved, despite the fact that each and every one of the provinces made by this government leading up to the 2013 election on LNG has been broken. Every one of them, Honourable Speaker. So here we have, instead of saying Plan B, we need to move towards a 21st century economy that builds on the strength of what we're good at here in BC, innovation, creativity, tech, bringing tech together with resource sector. No. What we're going to do is actually chop them down at the knees just as they're getting going. To the Insurance Act, Honourable Speaker, there's some changes there as well, and also the Mutual Fire Insurance Companies Act, neither of which I found to be particularly troubling, just a few minor amendments there. We've got the Ministry of Lands, Parks and Housing Act. Here, the amendments clarify BC Housing Authority to provide support services and manage multi-purpose developments that include a housing and non-housing components. It allows the ministry to include land development related to housing. It also expands the powers and duties of the British Columbia Housing Management Commission to include social and other housing services. There'll be some questions at committee stage that because these amendments came in under a natural gas development amendment section, they may be worthy of exploring this a little more detail, because I'm wondering whether or not this is actually something to do with housing specifically for the natural gas industry, as part of our, frankly, continuing generational sellout as we try to do whatever we can, whatever it takes to get to yes, no matter what the question. Liquor Control and Licensing Act, Honourable Speaker, page 15. This amendment, in addition to, is again one that I see no major concerns in. It gives the General Manager of the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch the ability to reconsider liquor enforcement decisions, and the grounds, of course, for reconsideration are to be set out in regulations like much of what we're debating. This amendment means that the enforcement decisions will be reconsidered without the necessity of having to apply to the court for a judicial review. And so there's a number of guidelines and prescribed grounds that are to be established by the General Manager for these amendments to work, and another piece of legislation there, amendment that I think will work well. So taken together, Honourable Speaker, there are a couple of troubling sections, notably two in this overall bill. Obviously, I'll be supporting the bill at second reading so that we can actually vote upon the individual sections at committee stage and vote them down accordingly. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.